Thank you very much, Sheila. Our final speaker for the evening is another redoubtable campaigner, journalist, publisher, Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire.
First of all, I want to thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Don't be fooled by the numbers in this room. This represents a much bigger group that's out there, and it's not just in this country; it's internationally. And I think everybody who follows social media and who interacts with people, as Emmy testified to, know what I'm talking about. This is a global issue, and I'm going to explain why. So, why am I here? Why are we here? This is a fundamental issue, and I've been trying to put this in a way that people can understand. So I hope that what I can give you is some boiled down explanations that you can take tonight, because you're going to be talking to people. This is how this issue is going to spread. This is how, if you really want to win this, which could be in a lot of people's estimation, certainly if you're a journalist or you're a publisher, if you're a news consumer, this is the defining issue of this generation. And if you think about from the beginning of the printing press, from the days of Gutenberg till now, think about a post-Enlightenment democratic society. Think of all the trials and tribulations that we've had to go through in this country, in Europe, in the United States, in North America, all around the world, just to achieve some fundamental rights, some constitutional rights, some protections for whistleblowers, for instance, for the press, that they might publish and be damned, but still they'll publish. Think about all the blood that's been shed for that. It's not unlike the fight of the suffragettes or winning the right to vote, which not everybody takes advantage of, despite how many people sacrificed for those rights. So this issue affects everybody. When you go away tonight and you talk to people about what these speakers said at this event that I went to in London, you have to make it clear to everybody you speak to that this affects everybody. This doesn't just affect the press, the papers, the titles that you love, the ones that I used to read, look forward to reading every weekend when I had my stack, to read The Independent, The Guardian, The Times, The Sunday Times, The Mail, whatever. But you understand, now it's every journalist, every publication, every blogger, everybody who uses social media. And I make this point to people, there's people doing forensic document analysis on Twitter. They're just ordinary enthusiasts, citizens. They're publishing, they're journalists. The amount of journalists on the planet has mushroomed, okay? So this issue affects everybody. It affects absolutely everybody. This is fundamental, okay? Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning are holding the line on one of the most important pillars of a post-Enlightenment democratic society. Understand that's what's happening, okay? That's what you have to get people to understand. You yourselves have to understand that first, okay? And let me tell you, when governments take power or take rights away from citizens, they don't give them back very easily, short of, a French Revolution scenario. And I don't want to see that happen. Of course, nobody does. But that's a very difficult path for society to tread down, okay? So this is not trivial. But I look in the mainstream media, I look at the journalists, I look at the people who should be covering this. I look at The Guardian, who milked WikiLeaks for all the street cred it was worth, and Edward Snowden. And to look at some of the pieces of fiction that they've published over the last couple of years, especially pertaining to this case and also to Julian Assange. And it's unbelievable. Not that they would call themselves journalists, but that they themselves don't see the danger in letting this one slide. And we've had the editor of WikiLeaks here tonight, and he's very worried, and so he should be, and so should everybody. The norms, what do our leaders call it? The rules-based international order. Okay, they even got an acronym for it now. It's RBIS system, rules-based international system. Okay, what rules-based international system? Making it up as you go along. That is the rules-based international system. It's a Hobbesian state of nature where might makes right. And this is what the editor of WikiLeaks was lamenting, and I could hear it in his voice. All of the things that we believed in, that everybody worked towards, dissipating, dissolving right before our eyes. This case is a touchstone on this issue. So understand that Julian Assange is a publisher, like any publisher. And Chelsea Manning is the source. Those two things make a story. You lose one, you lose the other. Or at least you lose the purpose of the other, the publisher, okay? This is so important. Now, that's the fourth estate. And right now, there's a lot of people who don't even know what the fourth estate is anymore, who don't care what the fourth estate is. And most of those people are people working in what they think are the fourth estate. So I could give you if we talk about fake news stories in the mainstream media, I could give you a list as long as my arm for every single individual publication just in the last 12 months, okay? But what we have is a system, a state that doesn't believe that it should be held accountable by anybody. And you have to remember, and Alexander pointed this out very clearly, in the United States, we have freedom of the press, protection of the press. These are things that are mentioned in the Constitution in the United States. So you lose this, you lose everything. This is how fundamentally important it is. So the system believes that it itself should be supervising itself, that only it is best suited to regulate itself, to hold itself accountable. What sort of system is that, I ask? Okay, I think we know the answer to that. We saw it in the mid-20th century, breaking out in Europe, okay? Corporativism, the term equated with fascism, made famous by Giovanni Gentile, an Italian philosopher, but attributed to Benito Mussolini often. That's the system that we're looking at now, a corporatist state that is not accountable to anybody. Corporations are not accountable. Full stop. Anybody who's tried customer service for any big company can attest to that most of the time. But that's what government's becoming like. You go to court, corporation has 100 lawyers. You have maybe a public defender. This is what the pharmaceutical industry behaves like. It investigates itself. It runs its own tests on. It regulates itself. So we'll do the clinical trials ourselves, don't worry, and we'll report to you about how we did. Don't worry, it's great. This is the system that's been ushered in the United States now for almost 20 years. So the government doesn't want a fourth estate. The case of Julian Assange makes that clear. And just imagine, how many of you have seen the collateral murder video, the WikiLeaks release in 2010? I just watched it for the first time in like 8 years. I rewatched it last year. And I looked at this, and I just couldn't believe what I was watching, you know? And you walk into a shopping mall in America and you gun down 14 people, the whole country goes into crisis mode. CNN scrambles 100 reporters and sound stages within 12 hours. Every network's down there. It's the horror of horrors, a mass shooting in America, okay? We watched a mass shooting on that video. Not only that, members of the press gunned down. But if you're a member of the military, no charges brought, maybe a slap on the wrist. And if that, it'll be on the lowest ranking officer or soldier, you can guarantee that. When in fact, Donald Rumsfeld himself and Craig Murray would attest to this, his name's on the order for enhanced interrogation. They're just following orders. But they'll string up a low-level private or a corporal or Chelsea Manning in that sense. So the other thing is understand that this is fundamentally a technology issue as well. This is a jurisdiction issue. WikiLeaks is in its purest form. If you could take a 21st century media outlet and say, this is an archetypal 21st century media outlet, no print, totally digital, international, decentralized, that's WikiLeaks. It doesn't do commentary, it doesn't do television interviews or podcasts. It just gets information, it vets it, it collates it, it curates it, does a little bit of formatting, and then it publishes it. And that's an invaluable service for the media. The rest of the press globally should be looking at this and saying, what a fantastic resource WikiLeaks is. They do the hard work for us. They do the heavy lifting for us. All we have to do is report on it, okay? And pull out the nuggets of interest in there that are relevant to our political situation, as Sheila demonstrated a couple of those nuggets in that very thick book. Okay, that's how valuable WikiLeaks is. Now, I just want to make a comment on Julian Assange. We talked about the character assassination of Assange. So I was at Belmarsh prison with a lot of people who are here today, protesting and also showing our support for Julian Assange just last week, 2 weeks ago. Now, the morning of that protest, the night before, I got a call from my colleague behind me, and she said, will you go on LBC radio and do an interview about Assange? And I said, well, she said, it's a maybe. So she said, I think George Galloway was meant to do that interview, so I volunteered to, he couldn't make it, so I volunteered to stand in. So I could say that I'm George Galloway's stunt double for LBC. Andrew Castle was the host, okay? Nice guy, nice guy. They did the pre-interview the day before, asked me questions. They weren't even listening to my answers, quite frankly. Anyway, the show starts, and I knew that all of the questions they asked me on the pre-interview, they weren't going to ask me any of those questions on the interview. So as soon as the interview started, Andrew Castle started laying into this issue of Julian Assange as a sex criminal and the issue of Sweden and reviving this case. Okay. Nothing about the issue of freedom of the press, nothing about one of the fundamental pillars of our society internationally, none of that. Just about Julian Assange's sexual exploits in Sweden and should he be extradited. So I took a few minutes to lay out the facts of the case to Andrew Castle, and he was a bit surprised. He even admitted he didn't know much about the case. And he thanked me. But then I asked him a question that threw him back a little bit. And I said, Andrew, and this was live on air. By the way, we've asked for this clip, and they won't give it to us. Okay? So I said, Andrew, do you consider, and he's a very nice, very polite, very nice host. I said, do you consider Julian Assange a colleague or not? Do you consider a journalistic colleague? Do you consider WikiLeaks a media outlet or not? And it's just pause. Okay? So that's the fundamental question here. Okay? I say this many other times. Government will do what government does. Politicians will do what politicians do. How many people expect that politicians are going to always tell the truth? Okay. I like your positive attitude, Dr. Gill. They're going to do what they're going to do. That's why we need an independent fourth estate. That's why we need a free press, to hold them to account when they don't tell the truth, when they are lying, when they are covering up, when there are crimes. What Chelsea Manning, what Julian Assange are leaking, you have to understand there's lives at stake. So even if there are lives at stake, that's illegal, that's forbidden. The full weight of the state's going to come down on you, not just one state, 2 or 3 states, for exposing war crimes, you could potentially save lives. Instead, we have the state pointing its apparatus directly at anybody who dares to embarrass the United States government or military, okay? And that's the jurisdiction issue. This is about full global jurisdiction, okay? The technology has introduced a fundamental problem, and we all know what our constitutional rights are, we know what our history is, but we don't know how to deal with this going forward. Certainly the government doesn't. They're panicking. They're in reactionary mode. You can see it now. The norms are falling to the wayside. They do not have the coolness or the level-headedness to sit down. Quite frankly, they don't have the expertise, okay? In terms of technology, most of these people that I've spoke to or heard talk, they're out to lunch. I've seen the talks at Davos and the various other forums, and a lot of people are completely out to lunch, ministers of digital culture and whatever, okay? They can just about use their email and send out a few tweets, and even then, it's haphazard, okay? So the people maybe sitting in this, behind me, this panel, has more knowledge and more insight in this issue, possibly, than the decision makers in government. And the people I'm facing right now in the audience, some of you, I would put probably in that category as well. You understand the nature of media. You understand the nature of the internet, social media, because you've been using it. You've been on the front lines. You've been in the forums. You've been in the chat rooms for 20 or 30 years, some of you. You've been blogging. Our political leaders haven't. They've been told about blogs and what they should know about blogs and what they should say about blogs when they stand in public. So that's basically the message. This is, I could go into a lot of other issues, but this affects everybody. So my message is simple. The message that you need to take away tonight is simple, okay? This is for everybody. And if you think the odds are stacked against you, understand that how things change is when one person gets up and says, no, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to accept that. And as with the letters flooding to the MPs is one example. But you have to physically stand up and say no, and you have to put yourself in between the aggressor and the person who's being oppressed in this case, who's representing the interests of everybody here and outside these doors. That is the most important concept, and I hope everybody can take that on board, spread that to as many people as you can, get people aware of this issue, get people to understand how important and fundamental it is. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
Right, guys, before George concludes the night's event, could I just say one or two things here? Emmy has asked me here that she'll be available in the foyer or outside the venue afterwards if you would like to meet with her, and she would like emails about solidarity actions and letter writing campaigns and etc. Could I also say to our online viewers and to those of you in the audience as well, that we'll be meeting tomorrow at Westminster Magistrates Court for the hearing of Julian Assange on the extradition charges. That is 9 o'clock that we'll be meeting, and it's at 10 o'clock that the court proceedings start. The nearest tube station is Edgware Road or Marylebone Station. So I'll hand you over now to George to conclude.
Well, thank you very much, Greg Sharkey, for all the tremendous effort that you and your friends have put into the organizing of this incredible meeting this evening. Not just a vibrant audience here in London, but you, the thousands, tens of thousands actually, who have been watching these proceedings live on that wonderful invention, Patrick, the Internet. In precisely the year, that a Russian gentleman, to quote my good friend Neil Clark, asked the question, what is to be done? A man called Hobbes wrote a book on imperialism. It has been in print since 1902. It is on every university reading list. It has been quoted approvingly by no less than Mr. Blair himself, by Gordon Brown, 2 British Prime Ministers. It has been quoted approvingly even in The Guardian. And yet, because 8 years ago, Jeremy Corbyn wrote a small comment, a blurb, see this film, read this book, which said, this is quite a good book actually, although it was controversial in parts at the time. No less than the London Times, formerly the paper of record, now another sewer of neocon propaganda, a cell actually of neocon propaganda, led with it on its front page that Jeremy Corbyn had endorsed a book which contained within its hundreds of thousands of words some casual racism, although they were only concerned about one particular casual racism. They weren't concerned that the author described the colonial peoples as lesser races. That's what he said in the book. Lesser race. They're not interested in that one, but his casual racism, an entirely unfounded casual racism about the banking and finance industries, has got Corbyn in the midst of another anti-Semitism storm with local elections tomorrow. Who'd have thunk it? The reason I mention it is this. We have tonight, I believe, certainly for the people watching around the world, slain the slander of Julian Assange. Whether his activities in Sweden, his attitude towards cats, his personal hygiene. Is there any sentient being who hasn't smelt a rat that as soon as Jeremy Corbyn became a threat to the British establishment, it was discovered that he was an anti-Semite? As soon as Julian Assange was no longer the flavor of the month, all kinds of things were discovered about him. These hypocrites are not, I promise you, because I know them. I've known them for well over 30 years. These are not deluded these journalists. They have not lost their way like some lost sheep. Journalism in what is laughingly called the mainstream media now is no more than a battalion of state power in Britain and in the United States. That's all that it is. And that is why the Duran, that is why 21st Century Wire, that is why the Canary, that is why the Squawk Box, that is why WikiLeaks. Because nature abhors a vacuum. And these people, with their criminal malfeasance, have created a vacuum. Of course, from time to time, though it's been a while, some nobility emerges. And let me give you just one example. When the Daily Telegraph was offered stolen property, that property being the details of the grand larceny of public funds in the MP's expenses scandal, which revealed that hundreds of members of Parliament, some of them the biggest names in the land, excluding me, of course, how disappointed were they when they discovered I wasn't on any of these lists. Some of the biggest names in the land, hundreds of members of Parliament, had been stealing from the public purse in false, in some cases forged, expenses claims. The Telegraph had no compunction about publishing this stolen information, whose provenance was theft. And rightly so. They were hailed. They won journalism awards. And rightly so. Their circulation boomed. And rightly so. Because what they were revealing was much more important than the original act of theft which had made these publications possible. Well, that's all that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have done. On a grander scale, they have revealed not just, important as it is, the grubby thievery of our parliamentarians. They revealed war crimes. Now look, when I'm dead, if you cut me open, the word Iraq will run through me like the word Blackpool in a stick of rock. And I am with Julian Assange until the end because of his revelation of war crimes committed in Iraq. I've told you, Mr. Blair, he's gone now. I've told you, as long as God gives me breath, I will pursue you until the ends of the earth to hold you responsible for the crimes you committed in Iraq. And after me, by the grace of God, my 5 children, my sons, my daughters, my grandsons, my granddaughters, and your sons and daughters too, we will never allow you in this life to escape the trial you face on the judgment day also. Now, some of you won't agree with this, but as I have watched over recent decades, our institutions, one after the other, failing us, our police, our fourth estate, our parliamentarians, our governments, as I have watched them all before my eyes fail us, I maintain that the least compromised, that's all I'm saying, the least compromised is the British judiciary. It is the least corrupted. It is the least compromised. It is the one that has retained some semblance of its independence from the political power. I tell you something. Let me finish then. I ran a campaign more than 20 years ago to save what would have been the life and certainly the liberty of the leader in London of the Saudi Arabian opposition, Professor Mohammed al-Masari. The arms companies in Britain had pressed the then Home Secretary Michael Howard to deport the professor to Dominica, where he would have been the only Muslim on the island and where the staple diet was pork. Michael Howard issued a deportation order, having had his orders from British Aerospace and the British military-industrial complex, which stood to lose untold billions in arms sales if this man was able to continue raining down fire and brimstone on the corruption in Saudi Arabia. Nobody gave our chances a fig. But I was always confident. And in front of the noble Judge Pearl, a Jewish judge, when some of them in the campaign discovered we had a Jewish judge, they were dismayed. I told them, this is the best judge we can have, because this man will be determined to be honest and fair and just in this case. And so he was. Not only is al-Masri still here today, but the man, Judge Pearl, administered what I called at the time a judicial caning of Michael Howard, left him without a name, and overturned the government. Now, the one today is a lower order apparatchik. She's a lower order apparatchik. All I'm saying is, yes, we need to politically mobilize. Yes, we need public opinion. But I also believe, and I implore our judiciary to stand up for what they are supposed to be, the custodians of justice in our land. And I believe that our lawyers, who are the best lawyers in England, will make a case that any fair judge will have to listen to. And I beg them to do so, to listen fairly and justly to the case that we are making. Double jeopardy, statutes of limitations, the balance of good versus bad, the balance of the public's interest. If our courts are to be worthy of the name, the courts of justice, they will stop this extradition. And if they don't, then we'll do the same all over again in the United States of America, with the best lawyers in America on our side. So I thank you for coming to what I think we will look back on as an historic meeting here this evening. Thank you very much indeed for coming.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, how do you find the guilty, sorry, I mean accused, imperialism and its lackey mainstream media? Guilty or not guilty? Right, so
Thank you very much.
can we all just join together and just sing in a few words? It'll be very easy to join in. The first line is peace, the second is truth, and the third is to free Julian Assange. Right, can we all join in?